protests that we're seeing on our college campuses, as well as some cities like Dearborn, Michigan. Alan, I've got to ask you, as you stated in the past, you have been able to represent a lot of protesters, but let's go back even further than that. History it looks like it's trying to repeat itself. If you go back to the pre-World War II and how people were stating that death to the Jews, and we saw people in Germany rising up, and even here in America, there were people siding with Nazis to say death to Jews. What's happening? A lot of people thought this was done away with after World War II and after the Holocaust, but it seems to be rearing its ugly head yet again.
It was temporarily done away with. Look, I live in an area of New York that's called Yorktown, and that area was a pro-Nazi area. There were people marching down the street with swastikas and yelling Heil Hitler. They brought thousands of them to Madison Square Garden. At the end of the 1930s, there were many, many American Nazis back in the day, and now their grandchildren and great-grandchildren are the new American Nazis. Now they're supporting Hamas, but there's not a big difference between the Hamas charter and Mein Kampf. In fact, I've coined the phrase for the Columbian campus. I call it Mein Campus. It's become a neo-Nazi campus, and there's no difference between neo-Nazis of the hard right, neo-Nazis of the hard left. We forget that Nazi stands for National Socialists. People claim they were socialists. So whether you're an extremist on the right or an extremist on the left, the one target you almost always have is Jews. And they come for the Jews first, but as Elie Wiesel said, they're never the only ones. And it's coming to a theater near you.
Yeah, I was just recently in Israel, as you and I talked about off camera, and I spoke with Natan Sharansky, who says this is out of the playbook of demonizing the victims and then trying to demoralize us and then denouncing us to make us disappear. What are you doing from your legal perspective to take action against those who have rallied to these protests, even threatening and actually physically harming some of the Jewish students attending these colleges?
Well, I was Natan Sharansky's lawyer for 8 years when he was in a Soviet gulag for just speaking his mind. So I'm a strong supporter of free speech, and I would defend the rights of real pro-Palestinian students to have legitimate protests or circulate memoranda or petitions or anything like that. That's not what these people are doing. They're blocking access. They're demonizing, they're harassing, they're threatening Jews. We're starting a new group called Hurt a Jew, We Sue You. And we will sue individuals, not the universities, others are doing that. But we will sue 19-year-old and 20-year-olds who are blocking access to classes. And we will sue them and get their scholarships. And we will sue them and get their cars. We will sue them and get their boom boxes. We will sue them for every penny they have, because you cannot get away with hurting a Jew today in America. And too many prosecutors are allowing them to get away. We don't control prosecutors, but we do control lawsuits. If we file a lawsuit, it has to go forward. And we will do that. We'll get discovery. We'll find out who's financing these protests. We'll find out the role of George Soros, the role of the Rockefeller Brothers Fund, the role of Peter Beinart, who was on the Rockefeller Fund and doesn't believe Israel has the right to exist as the nation state of the Jewish people. So we're going to get to the bottom of this through lawsuits. Look, I'm 85 years old. If I were 25, I'd be fighting in Gaza with Israel. I'm not. I'm 85, and all I can do is write books. I've written 55 of them, and write op-eds. I've written 1,000 of those, and speak on shows like yours.
Alan, and I'm grateful for you speaking to us. This is such an important time in our history, a pivotal point in our history. And as you talked about, you're fearful of the fact that we might see some of these protesters turn into terrorists and bombs start erupting on, anywhere in America. We have a porous southern border, as you know, where people have come into this country illegally. They might be co-opted to do some things as well. I've got to ask you, as you look at the lay of the land, what can Americans do to prevent these kinds of possible scenarios from unfolding that we might be witnessing our own October 7th and revisiting 9/11?
Well, there's short-term and long-term. Long-term, we have to get rid of DEI, this diversity, equity, inclusion, where everybody's either an oppressor or oppressed, where the world is divided. That's what stimulates all of this anti-Semitism, anti-Americanism. In the short term, we have to make a distinction between people who are just exercising their First Amendment rights and people who are breaking the law. And anybody who breaks the law and violates the rules of the university should be expelled and permanently expelled and not admitted to universities. You may have a right to say, I want the Jews subjected to genocide, but you have no right to be a Columbia student. And I don't want my child or your child sitting next to somebody in a classroom who's calling for the genocide of my people. You're entitled to an environment where people are not calling for rape, murder, October 7th, 10,000 October 7th. We have the right to a campus where people are allowed to learn, not be harassed and intimidated, threatened, and beaten up.
My thanks to Alan Dershowitz. Up next, Josh Weinstein. He'll be talking to us from his perspective as the president of Israel Allies Foundation. That's next. He is head of the Knesset Christian Allies Caucus. He is also the founder and head of the Israel Allies Foundation. Josh, it's good of you to join us this hour. Look, there's a lot going on.
Yeah, we've been in all-out war since October 7th. We've been fighting Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah on our northern border. We've been attacked by the Houthis on the way to the Red Sea, also fighting in Syria with weapons smuggling and things of that effect. There's even been UAV attacks from Iraq. So all these things have something in common, and that's Iran. These are all proxies of the Iranian Ayatollah tyrannical government, and they're being funded and directed by Iran. I think the big escalation that we saw last week was that Iran actually directly attacked us themselves. I think this was a mistake on their part, because now instead of fighting just the proxies, I think we'll go after the head of the snake.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're talking about. And of course, Israel reserves its right to decide how it will do that. And it also, of course, reserves its right to defend itself. As you know, you're the head of the Israel Allies Foundation. Some of the allies who side with Israel and standing with them, some of those particular world leaders have advised Bibi Netanyahu, of course, is the Israeli prime minister, to take a slow approach and maybe not even respond at all, or to make sure if he does, or if the country does respond, it's in a way that won't provoke an expanded war or a more regional war. But are they overlooking the fact, as you've just mentioned, all of the people who are attacking Israel at this hour?
Yeah, I believe so. I think they're miscalculating. Israel's always been the tip of the sword. They always go after us first, but our enemies say it very clearly. First the Saturday people, meaning us, and then the Sunday people, meaning you. So we're really the front line of this fight against radical Islam, and this has been an all-out war. There hasn't been a day that's gone by that we haven't been attacked from the northern border, haven't been attacked in Gaza, and you have incredible amount of missile strikes on the population. Now, in a democracy, the first job of any government is to defend its citizens. So I think that, the advice that we're getting from some of the world leaders is, try to be careful of how you react. But I think that in the end of the day, the government's going to do what's best for the people of Israel. At least that's our hope.
And if it isn't successfully dealt with there in terms of the radical Islamic attack from various factions, then it will come to America's shores and other Western countries. Is that right?
Yeah, absolutely. We've always been the tip of the sword. Whatever happens here always goes everywhere else. There used to be in the Second Intifada, for example, suicide bombings, and everyone said, "Oh, it's terrible that there's suicide bombings happening in Israel." Well, soon there are suicide bombings everywhere. You're in New York, and you know about all the terrorist attacks better than anyone can. That all started with attacks on Israel, and it's true. We're the only free democracy in the Middle East. And we're the only place that have rights for all of our citizens, regardless of gender or religion. And so we're seen as what they call us the little Satan. But the bad news is that the big Satan is America in their eyes. And so what they're trying here is just the first stage in their plan. It eventually will get to America if we don't stop them.
Well, Josh, as you know, and you're quite acquainted with what's happening here in America, and that has been the rise of pro-Palestinian marches and demonstrations on college campuses. What's your concern when you see this rise in pro-Palestinian marches and even pro-Hamas marches going on in America, your strongest ally?
Well, I think you said it right. These aren't pro-Palestinian marches. These aren't pro-Palestinian events. They're pro-Hamas, and they're anti-American. You have to understand that Hamas is a evil dictatorship. They use their people as human shields. A lot of the rockets they fire in Israel backfire and fall on their own people. They don't care that their people live in misery and are killed. And so when you're pro-Hamas, you're not pro-Palestinian. The Palestinian people in Gaza don't want Hamas on their heads. They don't want to live in a dictatorship. You're supporting the dictatorship over them. And that's why whenever you hear death to Israel, you also hear death to Jews, and then inherently you hear death to America. And that's what's happening. What's scary about it is that there are laws in America to prevent this. There are anti-racism laws, there are anti-Semitism laws, and there's also laws that stop people and organizations from supporting terror organizations. So, for example, Hamas is a recognized terror organization in America. When you support Hamas, you should be arrested for supporting terror. If you did this against any other minority except for Jews, you just replaced Jews with any other minority in America, there would be, the DOJ and FBI on the scene immediately. Yet nothing when it's against Jews. And so the question is why? And I think that's what's really scary to people in Israel. Why is hatred against Jews allowed in America in this day and time? It never was that way before. So what's changed?
Josh, look, a lot of people, they don't know how Israel's made up. And of course, the criticism against Israel or the attacks on Israel verbally has say that Israel is a racist country, a country that is not welcoming to other people. Look, I was there, and I've been there several times, and I see all colors of people, and I see all kinds of people from different faiths, I might add, not just Jews, but Christians and even Muslims living right there in the heart of Israel. Jerusalem, where you're at, there's every nationality represented. Talk to me about Israel and its concern for its people and the fact that it has to fight this this propaganda against the country, calling it a racist nation.
Well, if you look at it just objectively, there's no people in the world that have a claim to a land more than the Jewish people to the land of Israel. I mean, you can basically open any Bible in any hotel in any, by next to any bed, and you can see that not only was this land given to us by God, the Almighty, but this was purchased by Abraham, by Isaac, by Jacob throughout, and there's always been a continuous group of Jews who lived in Israel since those times. Anyone who just digs a hole in Israel can find the artifacts that show the history of the Jewish people. But despite all that, we're an open, pluralistic society. We're the only free democracy in the Middle East. We're the only place of the 22 Arab countries around us that have freedom of religion, that have gender equality, that have elections, that have freedom of the media. The media can say whatever they want, and there's no reprisal. So we're a very free and open society. But let's look into it deeper. Only 74% of the only Jewish state in the world is Jewish. 20% is Muslim. The rest are Christians and others and Druze and people like that. Everyone is free and equal under the law. They have the same rights. They have the same medical care. They have the same education. So again, the rhetoric that you see, the anti-Semitism, the hatred, it is something that's by design. It's not by any, people aren't just mistaken. Maybe the masses are, but the people who are spreading these lies, the people who are saying that we're a racist country, they're doing that on purpose. And you can come to Israel, anyone, go into any supermarket, and you see Muslims and Jews shopping there, and you see Muslims and Jews working there, and it's just made up.
And look, Israel is not teaching people how to hate each other. Quite the contrary, when you look at Hamas and you look at Iran, and we know for a fact that the radical Islamic madrasas, the schools, are actually instructing their children to do what, Josh?
Well, we're seeing this, and not only are they instructing them, but the financing for it is coming from Western countries and the UN, and they're saying that the weakness of the Jewish people is that we value life, and that they value death. The head of Hamas, when they found out that his children, who were actually Hamas members and fighting, were killed in a bomb strike, said, "Oh, praise to God," because that's what they're after. And it's hard for people with a Western mentality to understand what this enemy stands for. But they're standing for death. And they believe that if they can wipe out Israel, they can bring about the coming of their Messiah, the 12th Imam. So this is by a religious war by design, trying to cause death. On the other side, there's no people that has ever tried more to make peace with our neighbors than the Jewish people. Since 1911, we've divided the land of Israel, which is the size of a matchbook on a soccer field in landmass compared to all the Muslim countries around us. We divided 22 times in the search for peace, and it's always led to death and destruction. And so I think that October 7th was a big wake-up call for the Jewish people. We realize now that land for peace will never work, and that the crux of this war is that they want us all dead, and we need to defend ourselves. And people who believe in freedom and democracy needs to stand by our side as we defend ourselves and try to build a better future for not just our children, but your children as well.
Thank you, my friend. We'll talk to you soon. And my thanks once again to Josh Weinstein of the Israel Allies Foundation. When we return, we bring it a little bit closer to home, to Long Island, where we'll talk to Bernie Fershpan, who's marketing director for the Holocaust and Tolerance Center. That's next on America's Hope. Back to America's Hope. So we're talking about all things as it pertains to the protests that we've seen in the streets. And let us not forget what's happening in Israel, where people are still wondering what's going on with the hostages who were taken captive on October 7th. And then in the midst of all that, we have to find understanding of the human dynamic. How do we embrace each other through our differences? Well, one man who knows about that is Bernie Fershpan. He is the marketing director of the Holocaust and Tolerance Center in Long Island, New York. Bernie, it's good of you to join us this hour. And I must say, in full disclosure, you are a very dear friend to me. You're like a brother. And from your perspective of working there at the Holocaust and Tolerance Center, what's going through your mind when you see what's going on in our college campuses, Bernie, where people are actually chanting death to Israel, death to America, Intifada, and trying to raise the Palestinian flag or Hamas flag on the college campuses?
Well, thanks for having me on your show. It's always great to see you. I think one of the most important things that we do here at the center is we talk about this democracy that we have in this country. It's something that's very sacred, and we have to appreciate and be grateful for the fact that we live here in the greatest country in the world, without question. The First Amendment protects our right to speak freely, and we stand up for that. However, it can cross the line when tropes about Jews, anti-Semitism, hate speech, anything that crosses that line that can lead to incitement of violence and war cries for genocides. That's unacceptable. It's totally unacceptable. That's not what we're all about. And people forgot that we're all human. I think we need to see, we need a new approach. We need a new approach. And what we do with the young people that come through this center, about 30,000 students walk through the center, is we not only tell them the lessons of the Holocaust that have been forgotten, and that is not to stay silent, to be very careful because society is very vulnerable and very fragile, and so you have to really be careful in terms of who we elect and who we appoint to lead government, because that's what happened in Germany in the 1930s. It was a democratic society, ordinary people under extraordinary circumstances that ultimately led to a genocide of 6 million Jewish people and many more, and many others. The thing is, since the Holocaust, 50 million people have been killed in genocides. So we learn no lessons, and that's why we have to keep repeating these stories so that we don't repeat history. The story that we forgot in the past is that we are all children of the same original mother. Some 140 to 200,000 years ago, up until 8,000 years ago, we all had dark skin. As we spread over the planet, we used different resources, so we changed our cultures. We had different cultures, and I love the fact that we are diverse, because nature loves diversity. You'll never see the same butterfly, same tree, same leaf, same cloud, and so we have to respect and appreciate the diversity in humanity. And that's what I like to do. And that's what we talk about to our young people, but to remind them that we are all related. You're somewhere between 15th and 50th cousin with anybody you bump into on the planet. It's a family reunion. Look at people differently. You know, astronauts, when they go up to the International Space Station, they all have this transformative experience when they look at the planet and say, I don't understand. How can we treat each other like this? We are all on this little rock in the middle of nowhere together. This is all we have.
Today, obviously, something's gone wrong between what you've been able to teach young people about and what they're learning on our college campuses from their professors, as well as from outsiders who are coming in to agitate them and give them a misdirection with misinformation. From that perspective, how do you see the need for organizations like yours, the Holocaust and Tolerance Center, addressing these issues?
Very good. Hate is like a virus, and if it spreads, what a virus does is radicalize cells in the body, and then the cells go against the body, and they work against the body, and that's what kills the human body, like a cancer cell. But you have to stop the virus cell in society, and viruses hate, and it has to be treated. And the only way to treat it is through education. That's really the only treatment that actually works. So we have to educate the young people about preventative measures, not just how to treat the problem, but preventative measures, because as they say, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so if we engage the young people and have them consider in a critical thinking way, why did these things happen? Why do they still happen? Let's see if we can come up with more creative solutions. The fact is that Generation Z, Gen Z, and Gen Alpha are actually smarter than the previous generations. They can be more creative in coming up with a better solution. So we're trying to implore that and tell them that it behooves them to come up with more creative solutions than we have, because they're inheriting this broken world. We've been trying to fix it. It's a big challenge. And so we're asking them to take the challenge to learn the facts. And it's all about the facts. In colleges, too, they're not teaching the correct facts. Learn the actual facts. Do your homework. Don't just, see clickbait online and then just share information that may not be true. You really don't know if it is or isn't. Do your homework. Do your research. That's why you're going to college, is to expand your mind.
Yeah, Bernie, that's so true. Expand your mind as well as do your homework, because let's face it, some of the protesters who are out there on college campuses, they hear from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free. They don't even know what river they're talking about, and they don't know what sea they're talking about, and they don't understand that statement means expelling and pushing out an entire race of people, Jewish people. And it's not just Jews living in Israel. It's also Africans. It's also people from the other parts of the world, China. Every nationality is represented in Israel. So the people have to be educated, and it comes down to education. And then, Bernie, there's the fact there's a miseducation going on with radical Islam. I said radical Islam, which is teaching children to hate Jews, to hate Christians, and to hate, whereas from the Jewish perspective and a Christian perspective, it's teaching people how to love your neighbor, care for your neighbor, and even love and care for your enemies.
I have a lot of Muslim friends, and they say to me they don't understand where this radicalization is occurring, where it happened, when it happened, and why it's happening. It just doesn't make sense today in this day and age that we behave this way. Even though technology is so advanced, our attitudes towards each other is like we're in a cave days. We're throwing sticks and stones at each other. It just doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't to them. And in fact, people need to learn about Israel. The fact that almost half the population is Muslim, Israel proper. And we, my wife and I, when we go there, we go to Arab restaurants and hotels, and we actually get along really well together. It's the radical Islam population that people need to learn more about and see that there is a difference between them and the general population in Israel and how they all get along very well. The fabric of the society in Israel is really mixed. It's very much like New York. Israel and the Jewish state is a culture. It's not a religion. It's really just a culture.
Yeah, Bernie. Look, I thank you for joining us. I've got to ask you real quickly your personal DNA. What do you recall about growing up? What did your parents teach you about yourself and about your place in this world and your faith?
I talk about my father's story, who was the only survivor in the Holocaust of a family of 8 people. He was only 10 years old, ran into the forest, lived there for 3 years. I don't know how he made it out alive. 14 people were born because he survived. I don't think many people have the gumption to survive those conditions that he did. Minus 20 degrees in the winters as a young little boy, but he managed to pull through. And I talk about him all the time, about how great he was and the lessons that he taught me. Of course, he had PTSD, like most Holocaust survivors. I had front row seats to it. So I grew up differently. And but I respect everything that he taught me. And most of the things that he taught me were the actions, more than words, of how he treated people with the utmost respect. When we all take things for granted, a lot of the kids that we talk to take life for granted. They take their parents for granted. I never had grandparents. I say to them that if I can have 5 minutes with my grandmother, I'd pay anything, quite honestly. So I hope that you appreciate, respect your grandparents and learn about their heritage. My dad taught me a lot of lessons. He did tile work and he did plastering, but like nobody's business. He was so good at what he did that John Lennon hired him to do his bathroom and kitchen. He really treated his clientele, his tools. He made me wash his tools 10 times and make it absolutely perfect. It was just a show of appreciation to the things that he had. So I learned a lot of lessons from him because he appreciated the fact that he made it out alive, and he wanted to make it up to all the people that didn't by teaching his children to do better.
Wow. That's part of the American dream, Bernie. With all that we're going through right now, my final question to you is, what's your hope for America?
My hope for America is that we all wake up, do your homework, do your research, find out the actual facts. Israel has the right to exist. The people of Israel have been around for 3,000 years. People forgot the story of King David who slew Goliath, built a city for his people. It was Judea and Israel. And 2,000 years ago, the Roman Empire, they took a swath of the Middle East, North America, South Europe, and then there was a rebellion by the Jewish people, and they were kicked out. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were killed at the time. People don't even know that. By the Romans, but they spread out. They went all the way to China and Portugal and Norway and Africa, and they spread out. They were minorities everywhere, but they had a land. They had their own country. They had their own government, their own army, and they wanted to go back home. For 2,000 years in Passover, Jews would say at the end of the Seder, next year in Jerusalem. So it's been their home for 3,000 years, and people need to know this. They think it's a new thing. It's since 1948, but it's erroneous. And so, get the facts, be more respectful, listen to other people's opinions and their positions. We're all related. We all have our own story. This is really something that's so basic that people forgot how to communicate and how to listen.
Bernie, love you, man. Good to have you on.
Thank you. So I love you too.
Yep. Always good to see you. Bernie Fershman. He is the marketing director of the Holocaust and Tolerance Center in Glen Cove, Long Island. Easy for you to say, Bernie. I'm Rich, founder of Fellowship of Israel-Related Ministries, better known as FIRM. And FIRM has been doing an outstanding job on the ground in Israel for many, many years. But Michael, when October 7th happened, your organization, FIRM, was there, and you didn't sit by like all of the people living in Israel you were mobilized to action. What type of action did you take in responding to the barbaric attack of October 7th?
Well, it's an honor to be here, and thanks for having me on the show. October 7th changed the landscape for our entire country, and I want to be fair to say, as a ministry, we serve a network of over 70 different local congregations. These can be Arab Christians, Messianic Jews, nonprofits doing amazing work. And really, it wasn't just our organization, it was the whole body of believers that really rallied together. We went from being, as a nation, one of the most divided moments in our nation's history, basically on the brink of civil war, to being one of the most united nations on the face of the earth. And that was also evident in the believing body. And so we just set our hearts to say, we want to do three things. We want to help evacuate and relocate families that have to move out of harm's way. We were able to open up 7 different evacuation sites, hosting 1,500 people. We're 7 months after that fact now, and we still have people in evacuation sites, people that have not seen their homes in 7 months. They've been living in hotels. I mean, whole families with multiple kids living in a single hotel room now for months on end, and it's not safe yet to return to their homes. So that's one area. We also focused on emergency food, water, critical equipment, supplies, and just been a blessing to be able to be the hands and feet of Yeshua during such a trying time.
Many people just aren't aware of what's happening, and yet we see protests in the streets of America and around the world against Israel, which is still grappling with the effects of October 7th, and 134 hostages still missing.
Yeah, it's really quite sad. Unfortunately, the way our news works is that often the things that are the most out of the norm are the things that get reported, a little sensationalized. And yet there are still 20 to 40 rockets every day being fired across our northern border, drones that are sent into the country that need to be eliminated, actually casualties happening along our northern border. It's not reported because it's a normal daily event at this point. How sad can it get when enemy drones and rockets just become a normal reality? And of course, what's not being reported are the tens of thousands of people still in evacuation sites. So the 300 people we're still hosting are from the north. And again, it's not safe for them to return to their homes. They've been living in a limbo state. And really, there's not much hope of that getting better before it gets worse. We're bracing for what an escalation on the northern border could look like in order to push back Hezbollah so that our citizens can have peace and safety.
So with the citizens that you're helping and working with, and let's make that abundantly clear. You're working with Arabs, you're working with Jews, you're working with Christians, you're even working with some of the Arab Muslim community that lives and resides in Israel. And they did not follow suit with the Palestinians who followed Hamas. I mean, some of the Palestinians actually followed Hamas and became very dangerous to the people living along the southern border. Not to indict all of them, but some were complicit in the atrocities that unfolded. So when you're talking to this group of people, how do you find the common ground for the common good in moving Israel forward at a time such as this?
It's a great question. There's a lot of division between ethnic groups post-October 7th. A lot of trust was broken. Many of the communities along the Gaza border, it's important for people to understand, these were the communities employing Arab workers, Muslim workers, many of them Palestinians from Gaza that got work permits to come into Israel. Many of these communities were peacemaking communities that really had a vision for Jews and Arabs living side by side. That's where they lived, down near Gaza. And yet that trust was broken. And those work visas, many of them revoked, obviously with the war, a lot of challenges. And so what we see today is that really it's in the body of believers in Jesus and Yeshua that we really are seeing Jews and Arabs work together. There's a number of different Christian Arab organizations in Israel proper that, despite the rhetoric you might read online, are very grateful to be Israeli citizens. Our governments may not be perfect, but we are the only democracy in the Middle East. We are the only place where our Muslim citizens can vote and have rights and run for politics. And so many of them are very positive towards being an Israeli, and many of them want to help.
You talked about Hamas messing with the emotions and the psychological warfare that seems to be committed which is what many people will do if they're in a war situation. They'll use propaganda. And here on the streets of America, you've seen people protesting for Hamas as well as for pro-Palestinians, and you've seen them go to college campuses and even bum rush a college campus at Columbia, taking over Hamilton Hall. When you see that, that's another indication that Hamas is not just focused on the United States with its propaganda, but also sending it throughout the world and Israel. What do you make of all of that, Michael, in the capacity that you work in serving people spiritually, mentally, and physically, the whole person, to help them heal from the brokenness of October 7th and now the info war that's going on?
Yeah, so we're up against an ideological war, and I think what we've seen in the last few weeks or this month with the battle with Iran is we're seeing really our entire region having to pick sides. We're seeing radical Islam and really the cause, the funder of radical Islam throughout most of this region with Iran. Really different countries, different militaries, different radical groups starting to align with Iran. And we're seeing an alliance form to counter that. A lot of it's partnered with the West. Obviously, we saw France and Great Britain and the U.S. Come to Israel's defense, but also partnerships with Saudi Arabia and Jordan. So we're seeing a Middle East alliance and really like battle lines being drawn, and a lot of it centers around this idea of radical Islam.
We do see the reality of that here in America, where people have actually stood up and said death to Israel, death to America, right here on our own land. So I've got to ask you, you're there to bring people together. How do you see things going forward? Because bringing people together and talking about hope is not an easy task in the middle of adversity, yet that's where hope is born.
As a person of faith, as a ministry that represents a number of different organizations of faith, we feel like in the times of darkness, in the times of hopelessness, in the times of division, in the times of war, we have a message of peace, of love, of reconciliation, of camaraderie, of hope in the midst of hopelessness, of light in the midst of darkness. And that message is shining really strongly right now. I'll give one example. There was a news report in Israel. Most Americans haven't seen this, but an Israeli news report that on the morning of April 14th, when the Iranian drones and ballistic missiles and cruise missiles were fired, the number one Hebrew Google search term was Psalms of Prayer and Protection. That was what people were searching for, was Psalms of Prayer and Protection. And that's from a country that's mostly secular. Obviously, we have religious Jews, but even in the midst of crisis, we were searching for hope. And where did we go? We went to the Word of God.
Michael, you are a bold and brave man, and you're a man who loves people and loves God. So keep doing what you're doing. Keep shining that light. Keep giving the hope that people throughout Israel and the Middle East, for that matter, so desperately need, including people on the other side in Gaza, the Palestinians as well. I know you're reaching out to them as best as you can, albeit it's very difficult right now. But through your sources, I'm sure you're getting a message out to them as well. Before I leave, what would be your message to protesters who are out there on the streets and they're protesting from their own ideology, and people get that there is freedom of speech, there is freedom of religion, but to the point that they have become hostile in nature, which reflects the same behavior as Hamas, ironically, or maybe even intentionally. What's your message to people from that vein, forgetting October 7th or overlooking it or even applauding it?
Yeah, I think I want to speak to protesters, but I want to specifically speak to my generation, because I think my generation, we're a very cause-centered generation. It's very easy for us to rally behind causes that we believe in, but sometimes we rally behind causes we believe in, and then we don't understand. So what I would say to every protester is two things. One, let's make sure we really understand what we're standing for. Let's make sure we really understand it. I've seen some embarrassing interviews of protesters that don't really understand what they're doing. They're just it's cool to be part of a group fighting for the rights of humans. And yet, let's really understand what we're standing for before we decide to protest. And the second thing is let's actually look at what the fruit is behind these protests. Typically, we see good fruit or bad fruit. If I can even spiritualize the example, we see what are the outcomes, really? What are the testimonies? What are the examples? Is it violence? Is it more hatred? Is it comments like death to a certain people group? Or is it expressions of love, support, but just a firm stance for the truth? And I think it's not enough to support a cause. We have to know why we support that cause, and we have to make sure the outcomes from these protests that we're supporting are actually producing the outcomes that we intend and desire. So that would be my appeal to reason for people in my generation that want to rally behind a cause. Let's make sure we're actually thinking this through before just responding emotionally and really understand what it is we're supporting.